So, hello, I'm Josh, and I'm here tonight to talk about tiny talking to-dos. So, my day job, I'm a designer, I'm an educator, I've worked at these places, but at night, I'm very passionate about JavaScript and building things. And this year, I gave myself a challenge of just learning all the newness coming out of AI. So, I'm really interested in playing with those tools and technologies and understanding how they affect me as an individual and as a UI designer. Wonder how many people in the room have had a chance to kick the tires on working with an AI model like OpenAI or anything like that. A few people, yeah. So for me, GPT, this announcement, GPT 4.0, was very enticing. It's exciting because it's a multimodal thing. And what that means is we can potentially take input from video cameras and input from microphones and new speakers to sort of synthesize these like new experiences for our users. That's like really exciting. I realized, well, every computer has like a microphone and webcam. We don't really use them for much. We use them for Zooming and things, but could like the average website start to actually rely on these inputs a lot more? And what experience would that look like? That kind of kicked me off on this journey of just sort of hacking on the evenings on a side project. And it's been about 3 months or so I've been working on it now, maybe a little bit longer. And like any side project, it's sort of collected a bit of baggage and it's got a lot of different ideas in it. But I'll give you a quick demo of where it's at now. Yeah. So here is the app. And I'll just unmute my Mac and let's see if this is going to get picked up on the audio. Hello.
For today.
Is that a bit, did we hear that? Was that a bit quiet up the back?
Hello, hello, hello.
That's
Testing the sound waves, 1 decibel at a time.
we can hear that, folks. Everyone can hear that? Great. Because I'd be stuffed if you couldn't hear it. All right, so let's try some things here. So what we have in front of us is just like a to-do list. Like essentially that's the primitive in this app. You sort of use it like a normal to-do list. I could add a new ingredient, orange juice. And yeah, you just always have this like UI in front of you, like this interactive UI. And that's kind of the starting point. Because I wanted to, instead of having the chat as the sort of the main thing for the user to reason about, I was hoping to use UI, which I think we actually are very good at reading and understanding like the affordances of a UI. And then that's going to be like the tent pole for showing the user like how they can interact with it. So let's try interacting with it. I'm going to say, hey, can you add like bananas, pears, oranges, and melons to the shopping list?
Bananas, pears, and melons added.
So pretty slow. But,
What's cooking? Even the smallest of groceries can make a big, delicious difference.
That's true. Where things get interesting as I kept playing around with these lists, I realized it's really fun to bring in multiple lists and we can use the data in different lists and sort of transform them between lists. I'll give you a demo of that now. Can you add all the ingredients for spaghetti bolognese to the shopping list?
Ingredients added. Get ready to cook up a storm.
Yeah, so all it's got is this in this conversation is this like context of this recipe and understands there's another list and I've given it tools and it can modify that list. So I'll show you one more feature before we move on. So there's a bunch of different lists, and each of these lists are actually being generated by AI. So I've given the AI requirements, and it's generated a React component which meets that. It's using a design system called Chakra UI. And one benefit of this approach is that we can sort of ask it to change the list for us on the fly. This a nice relaxing list. Can you add some things to the list which would be relaxing to do?
Relaxation added.
So while we're waiting for the code gen to finish, this is using Claude Sonnet 3.5, which is excellent at least rewriting components based on requirements. So, and I think even with a good tool, like if you're using an like Cursor, it's actually pretty good at doing multi-file edits as well. Has anyone had a go at Cursor yet, or your hands up? Oh no, but in this instance, it hasn't worked. So that's a bummer. Often I find the error problem I have is it's hallucinating like icon names from the icon library. So it'll be like the littlest thing. It's so frustrating. But, you know, I thought this could happen. So here's one I prepared earlier. This is a nice relaxing list that I generated based on just a sentence. And I liked how it did a different style, added different elements. Yeah, so it's really exciting to like think about how we could generate UI, and but tonight we're really talking about voice, and get back to Espresso. So just to recap, like the app at the moment is using local storage for the data. Essentially, they're just React components. And we have this like voice UI, which is really essentially the user can like create to-dos and update them and delete them easily. And we can take advantage of like reasoning from large language models and generate new components. So let's unpack the techniques we're using to do this. So the first concept you might want to learn about if you'd like to implement something like this is voice activity detection. So you need to sort of understand when someone's speaking, and it's not like a trivial thing. I've been using Solaro, which is a VAD thing that gets pulled into the browser. You can run it in the browser. I think it uses Onyx. So it's pretty fancy stuff. And there's actually a really good repo, GitHub, called Swift, which shows an implementation of this with Next.js, if you wanted to sort of get voice activity detection working in Next.js. I'm also using Whisper. So Brock offers Whisper for like, I don't even think they've sent me an invoice yet. I've been working on this project for 4 months. It's like so cheap. So, and Whisper itself actually has some built-in voice activity detection. Like it's actually quite good. So you've got 2 layers already of voice activity detection, which I think is pretty good. And actually, there's an even cheaper version of Whisper floating around now called a distilled version of Whisper, which is very, very cheap to run it, even faster. So we're getting close to just real-time transcription coming straight into the browser. You haven't pointed it out, but everything we've done so far has just been happening on the client. There's no server for this. So I haven't wanted to build out a server thing. I just wanted to keep it all on the client and set tokens in the client, because I just wasn't sure what I was going to do with this project. And wasn't sure if there's any benefit in having a server. So at the moment, like we do the chat completion calls to OpenAI from the browser. And it's pretty fun. And we're just using GPT-4o. I've had a lot of success using GPT-4o Mini as well. And this is called tool calling. Has anyone done tool calling before? Okay, so yeah, tool calling is this idea that you can tell the large language model your functions and their types, and then generate the properties to run with those functions. So you can see here, if I was adding like chocolate to the to-do list, I could use a tool call, be able to take the context from our conversation, understand that that would be a useful argument. So we've got the argument here, text chocolate. So we can parse it. I'll just highlight here on this slide, you can see in this last tool called with the assistant, you see how there's those speak tags? We'll talk about those in a minute. So the JSON, one of the important things for tool call is creating a really good system prompt and so detailing lots of examples of how the agent should think about using those tools. And it's more examples than you think. You might need like 8 examples of different features to get that kind of adherence. And you might need a few examples of bad ones too. And that's how you can get really consistent alignment, especially with like a cheaper model like GPT-4o Mini. And then the other thing in the system prompt is like the whole screen is kind of actually being detailed in JSON. So I'm actually talking through to the model, like, hey, the users are looking at this list at this moment. These are all the items on it. By the way, there's another list on the right, and that's all the items on it. And those lists themselves have their own system prompts. So the list could say, you know, in fact, you probably didn't realize this, but one of the lists explains, hey, these are all the categories I have for shopping. So if you're going to add something to my to-do list, like, please use one of those categories. This is just text. It's sort of just a very blanket invitation in the system prompt to use that. It's pretty accessible. And it's user configurable too. So if a user has a new requirement for how a to-do list should be take incoming data, like for example, if they're a vegetarian or something like that, you could say like, do not add any shopping list items which are meat. And then perhaps it would follow that. But then again, it comes down to how many examples you have of that behaving too. So if you're interested in tool calling, these kind of techniques, there is a good repo that OpenAI had published called the OpenAI Assistance Quick Start. It's surprising how few good examples there are online, especially from OpenAI of these techniques. It's still really hard to find good examples. And one thing I haven't highlighted is I've been using a local first approach for this project. So in fact, the Tiny from Tiny Talking To-Dos is a reference to TinyBase. It's a really great local first app I can recommend if you're interested in trying local first, and it's been perfect for this project. I just have like a nice reactive data store that users can interact with. And in fact, a lot of it's just based off the to-do example that TinyBase had, which was pretty cool. A really cool feature to highlight with TinyBase is that you can create different data stores that are all reactive and they've got easy APIs to interact with. Then it's not React out of the box. There's like a separate library of React hooks if you want to use React, but you could use it with Vue or Vite or whatever's your fancy. And you have these like different persistence strategies. So when you have a data store, you can have it as this like a session-based data store or local storage, or SQLite is another one. I'm starting to experiment with that. I'm glad I'm such a robot whisperer at this point. And you might, has anyone heard of like local first and trying it out? People? Yeah, so there's 7 principles for local first, and I'm not sure if any app out there meets all of them. It's sort of an interesting debate in the local first community is like, these principles are all great, but how do we build something? But so you get like at least 4 out of the box when you start using ToDos, and there's a few other things to think about. Right, so we're moving along. So we're up to what do you do? Like you've generated the users, you've transcribed the user's text, you fed it into a large language model, it's coming back into the browser client. Like what do you do next? So I've been experimenting with Cartesia, which they have a WebSocket API and just a regular HTTP and a React library, I think, too. And you can sort of generate text really well with that. I think you heard some
How
text.
good is Tiny talking to do's?
It's a bit more of
Yeah,
that
Chief.
Australian flavor. It's really strange. A lot of these AI companies are like showing that we can do Australian accents as being like the litmus test for how good their voice agent is. And to us, we hear them, we're like, that's not good, buddy, but it's just funny. So yeah, Cartesia is really cheap. It's really cheap in terms of generating voice. And so it's a bit slow. Like obviously with the talking that we were doing, you might have noticed a lot of latency, and that's because it's all happening on the client. It's bouncing between these different services. And even though we can do the VAD in the browser, the speech to text is pretty fast, and the chat completion and the tool calling, that's all sort of taking cycles, and it's taking a while. But I'm still pretty happy with where I got to. And but recently there's been a development in this area, and it's one that I've been waiting for a while, and it's called the real-time API, which is a very, very, very new API that OpenAI have announced. It's based on WebSockets, and so you can basically do a lot of the steps we've just done get condensed into this sort of round trip, these events that are going to get sort of come down from the client or the server from the WebSocket. So it's going to eliminate a lot of the steps. And part of that is because GPT-4o, like underlying model, is omnimodal, and it can take in audio frames from the user and output audio frames. So there's no, I don't even know the language for it. You're not bouncing between different services, are you? You're sort of just getting input, output, out audio, as well as emitting like the tool calling the text we're interested in. So let's have a look at it. Let's have a demo. I'm really excited. I've been waiting for this feature for ages. Let's have a go. Here's my little console that I've got. It's actually based on this console. This is a much probably better demo of it if you wanted to try it out at home. If you crank up GitHub and you can get to OpenAI real-time console. That will be a good option, but I'll show you this one for now.
Hello, how can I assist you today?
Hi, what's on my to-do list today?
I currently don't have access to your to-do list.
Oh.
If you can share the details, I'd be happy to help you organize or update it.
Oh, that's a bummer. What else can you tell me about to-do lists?
A to-do list is a simple yet powerful tool to organize tasks. Here are some tips on how to make the most of it. Prioritize tasks. Use categories or labels like high, medium, and low to
Just try it one more time. It should have that context, the system message. Hello.
Hi there. How can I help you today?
Hi. So I'm really interested in you telling me about what's on my to-do list.
It sounds like you want to know what tasks or appointments you have coming up.
Sorry, guys. I think it's the the user effect. Oh, I had this all working. Okay. So one thing I want to highlight here is that I'll just let it talk a little bit more. Hi. How are you?
I'm just a virtual assistant, so I don't have feelings, but I'm here and ready to help you. How about you? How are you doing today?
All right. So it's great. Like it's very fast. The latency is obviously very different to what we were doing before, right? And the WebSocket API is very easy to work with. And the reasoning of it has dropped off a lot. Part of that is because of the cost. And so if I draw your attention to the top right of this screen, that very short conversation I just had there was about 15 cents Australian. It's a very pricey API to work with at the moment. And that forces you to really reduce your system message, right? Like if I usually rely on having a very long system message with lots of examples and lots of stuff. It's just hard to justify that, even for just playing around with it with its current price. One option you had to reduce the cost besides is you can just reduce the amount of tools it has access to, because each tool becomes part of the initial payload. So you might decide in some contexts to have only one tool as opposed to this one, which has like 6 at the moment. And the other thing is you can switch off the audio output. So you don't have to have it speak. Like you can just have it be text-based. And that's essentially what I've decided to do for my users, which I don't really have any users, but and like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, I like blew $20 on this the night it came out. I was like so excited. And then the next morning I checked and I was like, so fast. That's 20 US. That's heaps. So be warned, like make sure you do what I did and add that little usage box up the top. And then have like maybe like a fail safe to be like, go over a certain amount, stop talking. Anyway, so it's really exciting. But we've got to contextualize this with what we're trying to do, right? Like these APIs are interesting and have great possibility, but I've been showing people my app and getting user feedback, and a lot of them really don't want that conversationality, because if they're trying to add like a to-do or something, that it's charming at first to have it like that audio response, but it can be quite especially gimmicky after a bit of time. So it's been interesting. I've had to, this, which is not something I expected when I started the project, is that I'm sort of in the position where I've got to make different operators which have different sort of configurations, like some which don't talk at all, they only do things, and then some which only respond when you have like a question. And we can do that with those little speech tags, right? Do you remember those little HTML speech tags? So we can say, hey, when you have a question for the user, like whack that XML in and put the question in there. And then I'll generate that question into audio. And then, you know, we won't generate the rest of the audio, and that saves a lot of money because you're only doing like a very small snippet of that message. And then you can have it respond using real time. And at the moment, I just do real time with text only. Yeah. So yeah, it's really good to check in with your users and sort of evaluate the value proposition of this stuff, because it's as exciting as it is to work with it, it can be a bit of a pricey hobby. So yeah, that's my talk. Tiny Talking's to do is like online. You can play with it. You have to bring your own keys, but you can sort of have fun with it. And I've written up about it at joshuacrowley.com, and you can follow me on Twitter if you like. And thanks for coming to my talk. It's really fun to talk about.
We're pleased to thank Joshua for his time, especially that he flew in this afternoon and arrived at about 5:20 at the airport and made his way straight to come and see us. Sam, have you got the cube of questioning? And we've got some questions out
got
before.
the mic of questioning. Yep. We've got a few questions.
A mic of questioning.
You mentioned an alternative to Grok. Like, what was it?
Grok, alternative to Grok.
Yeah, you said it's faster.
Oh, sorry. There's an alternative, like you can use the base model Whisper, but there's been a new version of Whisper come out called Whisper Distillation. That is the faster one, I think. I don't know anything faster than Grok. Grok's pretty fast. Sorry for the confusion. Yeah. With the Whisper Distillation, I think you lose the multilingual capabilities.
Right. So the sort of the crux of the app, where it knew how to take the information from the recipe and put it into the other to-do list. So there's some operations that are happening there with the UI assistance. Did you use the AI assistant, OpenAI assistant, to get it to have a concept of how to work the app to copy things between the lists? Like, how did you teach the AI how to work with the to-do lists?
Great question. So OpenAI do that for you with ahead of you using the model. So in part of the training, it teaches it about the concept of tool calling. And then when you're like, you make your tools, I think using like Zod, like you can essentially just do the types for the inputs and the outputs of the thing. And then you just give it to, like the API guys there are great. Like this is really interesting stuff. You just give it the Zod types, and then the model itself like knows how to reason about that because of all the training it's had. So no,
it's like
you have
conversational training. Is it sort of like, hey, I want to teach you about a model that I'm doing, or is it like a form that you enter in? And what's a Zod? Sorry,
yeah, Zod's a type library, I think, for defining types.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and Yeah, let me rephrase it. So I talked about how in the system prompt, you still want to talk through examples of how, like your business logic for your app, right?
Yeah.
So I understand like function calling, but it doesn't necessarily understand what's important to your app. So you need to sort of give it some examples of just basic business logic exercises. It could be like 5 or 6.
And it watches what happens in your code while you use it, or
Or you do a run. So you've sort of always you sort of set up the tools and you give it all the messages in that current point in time, and then you will run it, and then it will decide if it will keep adding messages to it. And some of those messages will be like responses to the user, and some will be tool calls.
But how does it know what JavaScript to do to add messages to the list? Like when does it first get concepts of how to add things to the list?
Well, it's not calling the JavaScript. Let me find a good helpful slide. So I guess it's running the function calls are happening in the client, like on the browser. So you run the function calls. So it's just giving you the arguments for those functions. And
Okay, so you make the functions public so that the AI has so chat or what OpenAI has access to those functions.
no, it's all on the client. So it's really just the payload comes back with the arguments for the function saying, I would say like, I have a function like add to do, and I let OpenAI know this is the model know specifically. I have this function, this is its description, this is what it does, and this is the properties you can give it, and there'll be like just types, and then it will send back like essentially like a JSON or something of that function. And then in your loop, you just look out for those messages, and then you'll take those instructions, and then on the client, I guess you can do this on the server too. Like there's some libraries like Vercel have a nice workflow for like running tool calls in the server, and you run on the client. But in this instance, we'll just run that on the client. So it's not.
Okay, how does it get the messages from the chat to the client functions?
How does it get the messages from?
So you've got the client that's running, which has the functions on there. How does it know what to call inside of that? Gotcha. Okay, so it's actually the chat is part of the app as well. It's not sort of like a separate entity, the chat. Okay, I understand. Sweet. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For the audio, initially you had a fairly generic male voice and a female voice. Can you actually change both the gender and the regional accent, so you can have a Georgian accent like Jimmy Carter, or New Zealand accent like the All Blacks, or can you have a North English accent like Ian Botham, or just is it all the one sort of accent, just to make it the site more interesting?
Yeah. Well, you can clone your voice like with Cartesia. So if you wanted to use your voice, which you can hear this, but this is.
Nice to meet you. Hope you're having a great day.
It's me. And then with Cartesia, you can even like localize your voice.
はじめまして。良い一日をお過ごしください。
So yeah, you should probably tell your friends and family, right? Like if they ever get a distress phone call from you from like today, there's a small percentage chance it's probably AI, but yeah, you can, with this one, there's lots of different localizations. If I go to the default voices, you can see this. Yeah, Cartesia is like really cool. You just speak for like 10 seconds. Yeah. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll just bring this like user side, because they like give you an API for it. So the users could generate the voice, and then they could just like use whatever voices they want in their app as their assistant. I don't know. Is that a good idea? Or is that a bad idea? I don't know. Are we allowed to do that? It's a terrible idea, isn't it? So yeah, you can do whatever you want. Like different services have different offerings. This Cartesia, this is what they offer. They seem to have like, they can fish your voice out. Like you do the 10-second thing and then you get a voice ID. And then that's you apparently in their little soup of matrix multiplications. You fish your ID out. What a question.
Way through mostly because it's a joke. You said that we had to bring our own keys for your live hosted.
Yeah. So
are you just trying to collect keys to save you the next $20 USD?
That's an idea, yeah. Save me $20. Yeah, you gotta trust me. I guess this is a really interesting challenge at this stage of this, because like I don't know how you do like a typical SaaS, right? But you do like, oh, you got like I've had to use like 4 different services to get this all working. Like maybe it comes down to 1 or 2, but I don't think it's going to be 1. Like when I started, I thought, oh, just play around with OpenAI, but then so yeah, like I really like the bring your own key model. I don't know if anyone will trust me. You guys trust me? You're going to bring your keys? You can see like in the network logs. But I guess it's just one
you
day.
Bet the first one, I'll have the network log open. It'll just be XXXXX.
I want people to like, this is crazy, but like, does anyone use Terso? So like my goal is like eventually you have like an SQLite and you just give me keys to that and I'll put all the data there. And the benefits are then that's a bit more private, right? Because like I never see your API calls to these different services. Your data is in your database. That's like not a headache to maintain. But then you still need to trust me that I'm not going to flip it on you, right?
Do I though?
Play in your voice.
I did have one other quick question.
Yeah.
Have you played with Phi 3 at all?
Sorry?
Phi 3?
No.
It's a much smaller model. Early on in the presentation, it became less relevant as you went, but it might be a faster way to do the just basic to-do list stuff rather than the full OpenAI call to GPT, which is obviously a large and slow model. But anyway.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's great. Yeah, I think Google Pro might have like a built-in model at some point.
With the real-time API, how does that work with tool calling? Does it have like a separate channel for tools, and like does the voice channel, does it know that the tool is being called and how long it'll take for that API to come back?
Yeah, it's a very similar. You like append the tools to the WebSocket client. So when you start the chat, you can sort of like change the configure. It's a bit more like it's like different to that more like completion model. So you append the tool calls to the chat, and then it's this. You get events back from the server, which say this is a tool call, and then you just sort of do the tool, like you just apply the function. So it's very similar. Like it's similar. Like I just was able to use my Zod types that I'm using for the completion endpoint, which is just using a normal HTTP request, and it just works. But does that answer your question?
Cool. So you have like, I'm just trying to. I haven't seen the API.
Yeah.
But I imagine that you're feeding it this constant audio input, and then on the side channel, you're also feeding it in some text input saying that the tool has been called, or...
Yeah, it's sort of abstract. You don't have to think too much about it. And maybe, let me have a look. So like you have to define the different function calls up front. But in terms of the library, so there's no, I should say there's no Node SDK yet. There's no SDK for real time yet. They've just published a repo with a beta, which essentially shows like this is how if you connect to the WebSock, you can interact with it. And they're going to build out some SDKs. And they've started to do some API docs as well, so that it can show you like the kind of events you can expect to get back. So yeah, it could change. But yeah, right now I found it quite similar to the current experience, and because you're binding like the function calling to the I don't know the terminology, but like you're exposing the functions when you sort of define them, then it hooks it all up. I have to think about it, because one of the challenges, especially with the completion one, is letting the large language model like decide if it wants to keep making tool calls. And at the moment, like I manually just run it like twice, but sometimes it might want to do more than one tool call, and then it's like, oh well, we missed out on that, and it pops in when you do the next tool call, the next run. But with this, it's a bit of a better model. Cool? No worries.
You knew I was going to ask about how you decide to join models, but I actually am more interested in being client first. It's sort of tautology because we're sending all this stuff to the server, but looking down the barrel, looking towards the future, is there the possibility to offload more and more of this stuff onto the client? Like a lot of devices are going to have device APIs for text to speech and the inverse. Are you looking at the web APIs and where they're going and where those proposals are at and how to replace a lot of this stuff straight up on the device?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, like companies like Apple are like really promoting this idea of like client first AI, Apple Intelligence, and there's maybe a big song and dance about that. And so that might just be, and look, it's a consideration for consumers, right? Like they should understand, like to a certain extent, we may need to like really make it really clear to them. They pick which models they're using. Like different providers are probably going to have, like consumers are really savvy, right? And there's already people are quite apprehensive about using AI services, like already. And they might want to pick, like, I want to use Anthropic because I like the cut of their jazz, but they don't want to use like OpenAI because I've heard bad things about OpenAI. Did you hear about their CEO? And so that's like a challenge for us, is like, how do we educate users about those choices and then make it clear? And yeah, it would be great if the web provided native things, and there is like a native, I don't know much about it to be honest, like a large language model, like a small one, that I think Chrome has got a feature flag behind it at the moment. And that would be great. But yeah, it would be good if it was more. Because you pay for like if it's running on the edge, like some of these calls can take a long time. Like the inference could be a long time, and you're paying for that function running as on top of what might still be an expensive bit of inference that's happening.
How did you do the skinning of that component? Was it a tool call that was actually skinning the component, or was it actually generating code and inserting it?
Cool. Yeah, great question. So I can does anyone use Claude projects yet, or should be nodding your head a lot tonight? No, you're all over this. So it's like this. Like this is how I generate components. Like if I'm in a meeting, I'll just be like, hey, to give you a new to-do list. And it's got this massive system prompt that's like huge. It's got a lot of instructions. It's got 8 different examples of to-do lists, and some of the select documentation from the underlying libraries that I've used. So we were talking about TinyBase earlier. So like I'll explain to it, I'll give it the schema of the to-do list and say, this is like the schema that you have available for storing data. These are like the icon libraries you can access. And then I'll just like generate the code. And I've sort of explained like the only property it needs is the ID, which is going to be like the repository for where it saves the data in local store. And yeah, it just generates the code. So in the client, like when we were doing it just then, it's not a tool calling concept. I'm just doing a straight completion. I'm giving it this like massive system prompt, like huge. And then it will just take the user can sort of select the current, like if they're looking at a current to-do list, you could so specify this one as a starting point, and then it'll rewrite the code for it. Yeah. And then, yeah, usually it works. But I'm getting like, I started off with this process. It would be like 7 or 8 iterations in here, going back and forth, being like, oh, actually, this is a type error. Well, have you heard about the rule of hooks? Have you heard about the rule of hooks? Like, yeah, sometimes you have to say 3 or 4 times. Whereas like I've been integrating that into the system prompt. So now it's like almost like 0 shot, like in terms of you can just get a working to-do list. And it's really interesting.
I was wondering, yeah, like how customized is the prompt that you're using to your use case? Like you mentioned before about, if you're a vegan, you might have to change the system prompt to not include meats and things like that. Like, yeah, and it also, is the user able to change the system prompt to their own needs as well?
Yeah. The user is able to. This is like an area. Yeah, it's kind of cool because like this stuff is just, these ideas are kind of just coming out of it. Like I don't feel like I'm discovering things as a thread. So yeah, the user, what's a good example? Baby names. This is like a neat trick I've done. So they have a thing called operator instructions, and that's the system prompt. So they can inject into the system prompt whatever they like. And so here I've been really mean and said that the user's using this just suggests like the name Brian over and over again. But so the user could put in what they want. Like they could say, like, I'm really interested in adding special instructions for my kids. Like, and if they're using this, sort of make sure they're aware of like Maggie's age and what she's able to like reason about. And so, yeah, you can just add, the user can add it on the list and it's saved on the list. So in some ways, this like concept is like bundles of like data, UI, and like, system prompts, and you can use them in different combinations and change the way they interact. Does that answer your question?
So it's like more than just to-do lists. Like each of these is almost like a mini program. Like,
Well, I don't want to say that. Like, I just promised you a to-do list. If you come up with other things, then that would be great. One of them is like a note. You can like just make notes. Yeah, and there could be like little apps. One of them's like a temperature tracker. And these are all just, I asked for them and they just came. So yeah, it is like a little, I don't know, mini app, weird app framework thing, I guess. I think like in the past I've seen this idea of like a browser apps, or like someone would make lots of apps in an app and then you could browse between them. Has anyone heard that concept? Sorry? Yeah, like a hypercard. Yeah, hypercard. Maybe it's like hypercard. I actually never used it. Heard good things.
all right, anything else? All right, I think that's all the questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That was amazing, Joshua. Thanks again for your time. Could we please